It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Well, hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. As always, thank you, John Schaefer, that booming big voice, a hockey teammate of mine, a professional, a content creator out of the heartland here. He's a great guy, and thanks again for doing that outstanding introduction. Music, of course, by the inimitable Bob Pace. Well, today's show is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be as long. We're going to get to it here very quickly. I'm going to kind of give my take on the current news of the day, such as it is, and also to preview a little bit about what's coming up on Podcast by George. And, of course, what's coming up is what's always coming up on the show, a focus and emphasis on climate, war, and healthcare. That is the big three on the PBG. We're going to be talking about all of those things. Maybe we can get some hockey in there. I'd like to. I've got a couple of buddies back, a couple of professionals that are coming back to skate this summer from the pro ranks. Chad Costello is playing the Three Ice tournament around the country, folks may be aware of. And then another buddy's back from a stint in the American Hockey League. We might get to that. But today, it's all going to be the big three: climate, war, and healthcare. And I want to preview what's coming up so that you know what's coming down the pike. A big favorite coming back on the show, Laura Bellin is coming back on. Everybody knows her from Bleeding Heartland. And Laura's going to be talking about something, kind of an eyebrow raiser that was in the news recently. You may have seen it. There's some online polling that's come out in the wake of Roe v. Wade that shows that some of these Gummer Republicans, including Chuck Grassley from the Heartland. Yeah, Gomer Grassley. Let's get him up on the screen here. Yeah, he may be more vulnerable this time than any time in the past, perhaps because of his age, and also because of what he's responsible for. Voters might finally be holding this guy accountable. I talk about that on the show all the time. My God, everybody that you talk to bitches, pisses, and moans about how things are today. This guy, Chuck Grassley, largely responsible for it. One of the 50 most powerful people in the world in the U.S. Senate. So if you don't like the way the things are, left, middle, on the right, whatever the case might be, jettison this guy. Send him on his way. And there's some online polling out. And again, you have to kind of look at online polling with a little bit of skepticism. Doesn't look too good from Chuck Grassley. And I also heard Kyle Kulinski say recently that when you're looking at polling, you have to, when it comes to the Democrats, reduce their margin by 5 points right off the top, regardless of the margin of error, because of gerrymandering and the impact that that's having on voters and on polling. We're going to talk to Laura a little bit about that. She'll also have some scoops, I'm sure. She always does. She's a big favorite. Everybody likes Laura Bellin. She's going to be on the show to tell us who's too dumb and who's in on it on Podcast by George. I know people like seeing that. Well, the other thing that's coming up, we're going to have a returnee to the podcast very shortly here. Dr. Andrew Nish is coming back on. He's going to talk maybe briefly about the COVID situation, which is kind of up in the air right now. Don't know exactly how that's going. We're going to find out. And then, of course, monkeypox. For God's sake, monkeypox has arrived in the heartland. We're going to talk about that again very briefly because he's not an infectious disease doctor. That's not his expertise. He's a cancer doc. And we're going to talk primarily about exactly that. There's some news coverage coming out that shows, folks, we got Roundup in our gut. Yeah, 80-some% of people have Roundup, believe it or not. Phosphate something, I don't know what it's called. It's inside of us. It's in our urine samples that they're taking. It contributes to cancer. And Dr. Andrew Nish is coming back on Podcast by George to talk about that. And then a show that I'm really looking forward to. I'm working this. I think it's going to happen. We're going to have the team for Jessica Reznicek coming on the show. You may be aware of her, you may not. Her plight is perhaps second only to Julian Assange. You hear me talk about Assange all the time on the podcast. Jessica is, she's one of these people that doesn't just talk it, she walks it. She's a protester, she's a demonstrator. She went out over the line as far as law enforcement is concerned, and she supposedly vandalized some equipment on a pipeline or vandalized a pipeline, and she went to prison for years over that. And we got people out walking around. We got a former president, folks, that's given speeches with Freudian slips at major universities, appearing on television, dancing with Ellen, that's responsible for a war under a false flag in Iraq that some estimates say may have killed 1 million innocent men, women, and children. And he's out doing that, and Jessica is sitting in a prison for, I don't know exactly what she did, sliced some tires or broke some valves or some shit like that on a pipeline. I mean, my God, it makes you embarrassed and humiliated. It does me anyway, to be an American. And that's coming up on Podcast by George. All right, so let's get to the the topic of the day today. I want to go ahead and get this up on screen because this is kind of, the grumpy man thing, the old guy looking at the, the paper in the morning. And that's what I did this morning. I picked up the USA Today and saw this. And this is the front page of the Nation and World section of the USA Today. And it's got 3 elements here. Let me get this a little bigger on screen so that I can see it here. A meeting unhinged. It's got this new video that you probably have seen by now coming out of Uvalde, Texas. And then the final one is chaos reigns as Biden travels to the Middle East. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here. I want to talk about this meeting unhinged thing and give you my synopsis on this. And again, an encouragement to watch Podcast by George, because what I try to do here is to highlight or feature some angles, some looks at this thing that I think are unique. And I also, if they're mine, obviously, happen to think that they're correct. I don't always run with the traffic. You're not going to see mainstream media talking points on Podcast by George, but you're going to see a perspective on the news like this January 6th hearing that you don't always see, or maybe don't see anywhere in the mainstream media. My take is that this may actually result in something, not because of what's being revealed necessarily, but because Americans are influenced by media so much. It's how we elect our presidents from, movies and game shows, stuff like that. Honest to God, yeah, that's how Americans select the leader of the free world, for God's sake. And they also are looking at history that way, the history, the present, and perhaps the future as generated by Hollywood. And that's why I think something may come out of these January 6th hearings, and I talked about that just recently. Now, these clips are very brief, so stay with me here. I'm going to show this. This is my point that I made just maybe about a week or so, very recently on Podcast by George. Here it is. Well, and I want to say this, when I'm looking at this too, and I thought going in that nobody's going to watch this, nobody's going to care. Well, actually, a lot of people are watching it. A lot of people do seem to care. And the point that I made was, well, they're not going to deal with anything significant here. But remember, what brought down Richard Nixon's presidency and may bring down the ascendancy again of Donald Trump, what brought down Nixon wasn't the Vietnam War. It wasn't the illegal invasion of Laos and Cambodia. It was a break-in at Watergate in a hotel, a seemingly small, insignificant nick in the electoral process that was seen on national television. That brought him down. To go back to what I was talking about earlier with this young woman talking about Trump grabbing the steering wheel and assaulting a Secret Service agent, you think that hell that's much to do about nothing. Nah, wait a minute. It might be a lot to do about everything. Yeah, folks, this may stop the re-ascendancy. I don't even know if that's a word. I like it, though. That might be an original from the PBG. It might stop the re-ascendancy of Donald Trump in 2024, because old Joe ain't looking too strong right now. The polls are not looking good for him or for Trump, for that matter. But it's almost a coin toss at this point, and Trump may be coming back, except for these January 6th hearings. And I think they may do it. And the point that I was making there with the doc with Richard Nixon, and a shout out to Laurel Krauss. I got to mention this because Nixon, he wasn't facing impeachment over Laos or Cambodia or the execution extension of the Vietnam War, or, shout out to Laurel Krauss, the killing of those 4 students on the campus and wounding of others in Kent State, which is something that stopped, the buck stopped on his desk for that. If there was something that he could have been impeached for, it should have been that, but it wasn't. It was the Watergate break-in. This may be Trump's undoing. Let's hope. keep our fingers and toes crossed. Okay, let's go back to the paper here. I wanted to get to this next item here. So you can see this up on the top right that I've circled here. This has to do with Uvalde. In Uvalde, Texas, Dateline, Associated Press reporting here. A new wave of anger swept through Uvalde on Tuesday over surveillance footage of police officers in body armor milling in the hallway of Robb Elementary School while a gunman continued firing inside. Oh, my God. I mean, it's the reporting out of Uvalde has been almost too difficult to look at, but we need to. Ever since it first started to come down the pike. A fourth grade classroom where 19 children and 2 teachers, God love them, were killed. The video published Tuesday by the Austin American-Statesman is a disturbing 80-minute recording of what has been known for weeks now about one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. That heavily armed police officers, some armed with rifles and bulletproof shields, massed in the hallway and waited more than an hour before going inside and stopping the May 24th massacre. I mean, my God, it's just, it's tough, folks. I mean, it really is tough to talk about Uvalde. It's tough for me. But the point that I want to make is that I was talking about this long before anybody else was when the news first came down. I talked to Joe Gorton with the Brady United folks about exactly that. I'm going to play this clip. Again, it's not very long, but this is an example of the insight and perspective that you can get from the guests and sometimes from me on Podcast by George. Here it is. And the point that I was making, and I tell people I like to bring up kind of tangents and angles and points that you're not hearing in a lot of other places. And the point that I was bringing up is that if we are thinking that a solution or that a mitigation or that really any help with this horrible circumstance existing in America is going to come from better training of police, by criticizing police, by calling them out as cowards, it's not going to happen, because the way that I explained it to people, and it's kind of odd to me with all of these guns across America and so many people exposed to them, there ain't many people in this real world that we live in. Now, I'm not talking about Hollywood. I'm talking about the real world. There ain't many that are going to run toward gunfire, run into an AR-15. Cops ain't going to do it. Soldiers don't do it. I mean, it's just not, it's not realistic for us to expect this to be any part of the solution. I think it's magic thinking, and I think it's actually part of the problem. Okay, so I hope you pick up what I'm putting down there. And by the way, I'm not trying to excuse or apologize for law enforcement at all. I'm not a big fan of law enforcement. I've had my encounters with the cops in years past myself. So, I mean, they're open to plenty of criticism, and it should come, and it is. But the point that I want to make is that's not the solution, folks. That's not going to help this circumstance at all. The guns are there. The nuts are out there. Anything that we can do to get the guns out of the hands of the nuts will help prevent this from happening in the future. To worry about what doors were locked and who went in where and expecting cops to run headlong into gunfire to save anybody is not helping at all. Well, that was with Joe Gorton with Brady United. And he made an excellent point here. They're paid to do that. They're hired to do that. But the point is, if they don't do it, then they get fired. Then they get put on the street. Then something should be done. Somebody should be held accountable. And let's hope that's what will happen. All right, back to the paper here. And look at this bottom article that I've circled here. And let me bring this up bigger here again so that I can read a little bit of it. Now, this is Chaos Reigns as Biden travels to the Middle East. This is Associated Press, Dateline, Washington, D.C. President Joe Biden will try to reaffirm and recalibrate U.S. relationships in the Middle East during his first trip to the region since taking office, but it won't be easy in a corner of the world that's asking fresh questions about the future of American influence. And got to continue here. Biden departed late Tuesday, bound for Israel, where chaotic politics. You heard they're government collapse, that's what they call it, have left a caretaker government in charge. The caretaker might be us until elections later this year, limiting the opportunity for durable deal making. It's unlikely that Biden will have much better luck in the West Bank when he visits with Palestinian leaders who have become increasingly unpopular among their own people. And of course, the thing about this is Saudi Arabia. That's who he's going to meet with out there. And folks may recall, I hope they haven't forgotten, I certainly haven't, that Joe Biden talked tough on the campaign trail about doing something about the Saudis, most notably because of the genocide in Yemen that they are behind, and also because of this unbelievable, horrific killing of Jamal Khashoggi in that Saudi embassy in Turkey. And I've got this film clip. I want to play it again here. Let me see if I can get this to come off the screen here so that you can see it. All right, so let me bring this clip up to show you what Biden was talking about out on the campaign trail.
We were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
And, of course, none of that happened. Ukraine happened instead. The warmongering goes on. He undoubtedly is under the influence, and there's just no doubt about that, because they are influential, folks, of the war lobby and the oil lobby. That's got something to do about this. But this Khashoggi guy, my God, he was a columnist for the Washington Post. You remember him, right? He walked into that embassy, that consulate, the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. For Christ's sake, they chopped him up with a bone saw. Carried him out in garbage bags, for God's sake, a columnist for the Washington Post. And this goes back to Julian Assange that I talk about all the time on the show. And Jessica Reznicek is an example, a whistleblower, somebody that's out there protesting and doing these types of things. Folks, if we don't know what in the hell's going on in the world, if we allow people to be stuck in Belmarsh prison like Julian Assange is for revealing war crimes, the truth, never found to have falsified or misled or been mistaken even about anything. If we put people like that in jail, if we allow people like that to walk into a consulate, and I think this Khashoggi dude was trying to get something to do with his marriage license or something, I can't remember exactly what it was. If we allow that to happen, we're never going to get out of this. We're never going to know what in the hell is going on, and we're never going to be able to do anything about it. And I see these articles. That's just the front page of the Nation and World section of the USA Today. And that's a little bit of what I wanted to talk about and bring up on today's show. And so we're not going to take very long. We're going to get on out of here. I just wanted to preview these elements that are coming up. Most notably, the great Laura Bellin with Bleeding Heartland will be on. Dr. Andrew Nish, who everybody likes on the show. And then, of course, the team with Jessica Reznicek. It's all coming up on Podcast by George as we continue to focus, as always, on climate, war, and healthcare. Well, that's going to do it for today. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast.